One.
Welcome everybody to Abolitionist Approach to Reimagine Child Welfare. I'm Ann Shalek. It's a wonderful privilege to moderate this discussion among this phenomenal group of people, the panelists for this session. This group of people have been committed for many years to transforming the family regulation system, and they have written astounding papers taking on the difficult, complex tasks of doing two things, both imagining a transformed system while they have been simultaneously toiling in the work of surviving, of combating the daily horrors of the family regulation system, and sustaining for them and the people and they work with caring and supportive families, friends, and colleagues who they work with. Through all of this, finding joy, comfort, humor, fulfillment in this work that's so important and so hard. And they've poured that into their written work as well as their advocacy, and bring this all to us today. Before we start, I want to join in the collective thanks to Jane and Nancy for their vision, their commitment, their energy, and their skill in bringing us all together in these conditions. And I also want to express my personal debt to Dorothy Roberts, both as a colleague and also for her work, Shattered Bonds, which is a foundational text that I use in the Gender Justice Clinic, which I teach, where I teach students that the intersection of race, gender, and poverty is essential to the work of any lawyer who is representing clients, whether that be in the kinds of cases that arise out of the family regulation system or any other cases. Those conditions that people come into the legal system with are basic to their experiences of dealing with that system. And Dorothy Roberts' work has been essential to teaching them how to do that in the very best way possible. So I pass on her wisdom every day in my teaching to new generations of advocates. We are fortunate in this panel to enter into an inspiring and evolving conversation that Nancy and Jane and all the other panelists and moderators have created for this conference. So we're fortunate because many of the concepts, many of the ways of thinking about the family regulation system are already out there and a part of this conversation that we're entering. People have had a chance to become familiar with them through this conference, beginning with Dorothy Roberts and the commentators on Wednesday night, and continuing through each of the panels that have elaborated particular topics that are critical to understanding the family regulation system. And we've heard, most importantly, from the many who have recounted their lived experiences within that system. So so these other panels have introduced the theme as they've gone through their topics of how to make change as we pursue abolition. It's a question that returns in panel after panel. Our panel here takes on that question directly. What is it to engage in the ongoing project of imagining a new system, yet creating it through our daily work? And how we, in our daily work, build a system that cares for and supports family, while we're also in a daily way dismantling the system that acts with such brutality towards people. This whole panel, the people on it, have done this by looking at the system, some from the beginning of it, some from the end of it, and some throughout it. And really just addressing in a structured, disciplined, and creative kind of way, in an imaginative way, what this project looks like. Also, this panel is fantastic because it is thoroughly imbued with collaboration and exploratory writing. The work that the panelists have created takes wisdom from a diverse group of authors. They all get affirmation from the creative thinking and approaches of each other, and then they bring it to us by developing new kinds of knowledge that's rooted in the lived experiences of people who have gone through the family regulation system. We have 4 papers today. One is the ending of the family death penalty. There are many authors on that paper. 4 of them are here with us today. Erin Miles Cloud, who will present the paper, and she'll be speaking also for her co-participants, Tahiba Bain, Elizabeth Brico, and Vanya Quarles, who you'll hear from later. The second paper is Reimagining School's Role, and 2 people are participating today, and they have more authors, and we'll hear from Brianna Harvey in our first segment, and Josh Gupta is her co-author, who will also be participating today, and you'll hear from him later. The third paper is Mutual Deference Between Hospitals and Courts, and you'll hear from Clara Pressler about that. And the fourth paper is Adoption Cannot Be Reformed. And for the introduction to that, you'll hear from Ashley Albert for herself and Amy Mulzer. So you can hear from all of these participants. We're not going to take questions during this panel. We will take them right after in the breakout session. That breakout session will be right here. You do not have to go to another room for it. So you will be able to ask your questions, but we have a lot of people to get through. And so we'll move on now to the first segment. The first segment of our presentation is a brief introduction of each of these papers. We're going to do all 4 of them in 10 minutes. So the 4 people who are doing that are going to get 2.5 minutes apiece, and I will move them along. First, we have Ending the Family Death Penalty, and we have Erin Miles Cloud.
Good afternoon. I'm introducing Ending the Family Death Penalty, Building a World We Deserve by Ashley Albert, Tahiba Bain, Elizabeth Brico, Bishop Marcia Dinkins, Khalees Houston, Joyce McMillan, Vanya Quarles, Lisa Sangoy, myself, Adina Marks Aparti, and the art by Jamel are collectively visioned together. We are directly impacted mothers, community organizations, and allied advocates across the country, fighting for family liberation. Many of us met for the first time in Philadelphia, where we participated in a convening called Fighting for Family, co-hosted by the National Council. Together, about 50 people, predominantly women, mothers, and people of color, decided to deepen our relationship, leverage our expertise, and fight against family separation. We wrote this article at a time when our movement and momentum of resistance has suffered from isolation, the overwhelming oppressive reach of carceral systems, lack of funding, political access, racism, and many more afflictions. We sit and write in a cold winter of activism, desperately awaiting a summer of change, reckoning, and uprising. We ask that you read this article as it was intended, as a memorialization of a time of thinking between a group of women envisioning and embodying change, not as a prescriptive fix. We implore you to take time with this article. Let it sit, talk about it, disagree with it, agree with it, paint about it, dance about it, imagine and build freedom. We are not perfect. We build where others dare even set foot. We bear our lacerated hearts to you and to anyone who cares to meaningfully share this vision and dream. Our grief and our joy, they live together. We will be as free as will our children and our children's children. When you read this article in both substance and form, it aims to subvert the law review article format. It visions and dreams first. It does not give you a historical rundown of the law. It proposes a collective vision. This is not only important, it's tactical. To be an abolition, you must vision first. You must have the most expansive version of imagination. It is only then that you can actually measure what is a reform and what is an abolitionist step. Second, it will demand a repeal of ASFA, not because it's such a poor policy, it is, but because, as this paper explains, it is a political figment of the imaginations of the oppressors. In its third section, it deviates most profoundly from the law review format. Instead of recommendations, it's a compilation of interviews, conversations, and invitations. We write this article because we invite you to build with us and exist in principled struggle. It will not just live in this academic space. It will be on our website, repealasfa.org. It will be on social media accounts, Repeal ASFA. So read it there, read it in a journal. It doesn't matter. Join us in a political journey. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Erin. On to Brianna.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brianna Harvey. Myself, along with my co-authors, Josh Gupta-Kagan and Christopher Church, are just really excited to be able to share our paper with you. It's really an interdisciplinary work of love. All of us come from very different backgrounds and worldviews. Myself being a social worker, and both Josh and Chris having experience with the law field. And so I think that this really speaks to our kind of views on looking at this project of abolition with the family policing system. And so one of the things we hope to illuminate through our paper is really looking at the ways that schools collude with the family policing system, because we think that it's something that is really minimally talked about within the scope of the literature. We think, especially knowing that education personnel are the number one reporter of families, specifically Black children and families, to the family policing system, schools are really helping to directly entangle and funnel families into this punitive, coercive, carceral space. And so for us, we really wanted to bring that to the forefront while also talking about mandated reporting laws and the harm that that has caused generationally to low income and Black families. But we also really want to look at this as a space of being able to re-envision schools and looking at how we can disentangle schools from this carceral apparatus. How can we remove schools from working coercively with the family policing system and really reimagine them as a space of opportunity? Our hope is really to present different, understandings and imaginations of our mind of how we can envision the ways that schools can kind of change the ways that they're interacting with communities and families right now. We know that generationally, a lot of youth go first to schools as their contact for resources, for connection to basic needs. And so what would it look like for schools to, instead of being a space of surveillance and coercion, to really instead be the space where you can get medical care, mental health care, legal services and supports, mental health supports. And so I think that's kind of what we took a stab at, was really reimagining education as a space of opportunity.
Thank you, Brianna. Clara.
Thank you so much. My article is titled Mutual Deference Between Hospital and Courts, How Mandated Reporting from Hospital Providers Harms Families. My article focuses on the experience of parents who take their child to the hospital, and instead of receiving care, they are investigated, arrested, separated from their children, sparking a legal process that can take weeks, months, or years to resolve. There is a common misconception that cases stemming from hospitals represent a subset of cases that are more serious or somehow more reliably concerning because they were called in by a trained medical professional. My article seeks to dismantle that misconception and focuses on how these cases not only present unique challenges and cause tremendous harm, but reveal fundamental problems in mandated reporting. In my paper, I use the term mutual deference to describe why cases stemming from hospitals are so harmful to families. Mutual deference refers to the relationship between the hospital, where the call originates, and the legal system, which determines the fate of the family. The dynamic is this: medical professionals are obligated to report any reasonable suspicion that a child is at risk. They are required to report immediately and without delay. They are discouraged from deliberating, seeking a second opinion, or considering the collateral consequences of their call. In doing so, this is an instruction of deference. Hospitals must defer their concern to the system. In doing so, they are reassured that their concern will be investigated by the experts in the field of child protection. But the system that receives that call is comprised of lay people in the field of medicine. These are caseworkers, judges, and lawyers. None are equipped to evaluate a medical concern. And so the legal system defers back to the clinician who is seen as the expert, too often presuming that there is a medical risk they cannot understand or question. After all, a doctor has expressed a concern about child safety, and that is scary. The legal system decides to take the safer course, which is, they see, to remove the child from their parent while they wait to receive guidance on the medical concern. Remove first, investigate later. The harm of mutual deference is exactly this: the elevation of a clinician's reasonable suspicion to a finding of imminent risk, justifying needless separation of families. And my article argues that mutual deference is particularly harmful for families of color who are subject to bias and received less benefit of the doubt at every stage of the process. A medical provider's reasonable suspicion is often nothing more than a reflection of harmful associations between low-income communities of color and neglect, the incorporation of social risk factors into diagnoses of abuse, judgments about a parent's demeanor or forthcomingness at a hospital, not realizing that certain questions are being experienced as and are an investigation, not a safe plan of medical treatment. My hope is that by exploring the fundamental and problematic ties between hospitals and the family policing system, this article contributes to our challenge to what Professor Roberts referred to as the foundational logic of our system as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. Now, on to Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Molzer, and I'm introducing the paper that Ashley Albert and I wrote together. So much of the work with regard to abolishing the family policing system, and I think you've seen this throughout the course of the conference, focuses on the front door to the system, and rightfully so, because if we shut down the front door to the system and stop families from coming in, stop families from being surveilled, separated, then we shut down the system. But as I think Aaron and the members of the Repeal ASFA group have highlighted as well, the endpoint matters too. And that's partially because there are families already caught up in the system, and there will continue to be families caught up in the system until we shut it down. And we can't leave those families to be separated and destroyed. We need to fight for them. And even more so, it's not just about fighting for those families, and it's not just about ending the destruction of TPR. Because if we're going to shut down the child welfare system, the family regulation system, the family policing system, we have to talk about adoption. And adoption drives the system in a billion ways, and we all know this. Thanks to ASFA, it serves an especially huge role now, but it's always played an important role in the system. And one of the ways that it does that is that it provides cover for what the system is doing to families. It provides cover for judges, for lawyers, for the public to feel as if they can fix all the harms that they've done in destroying families, in not supporting families in the first place, by simply cutting it off, giving the child a new family and tying it up in a great big bow and having a happy ending. And obviously, as we all know, and as the Repeal ASFA piece puts forth most beautifully, that's simply not true. It's not a happy ending. It doesn't fix things. These are things that can't be fixed. So what Ashley and I try to do in our paper is, instead of focusing on the reimagining part, which is essential, of course, and I'm not downplaying it, but instead of focusing on the reimagining part, we focus on the abolishing part, because the thing with adoption is that we have an alternative. This isn't something we need to come up with. We have legal alternatives to adoption for people who need legal structures, right? We have permanent guardianship, we have third-party custody, we have parental designation forms, and we have community alternatives to adoption. We have always had grannies and aunties and neighbors and family and friends who take care of children who can't be cared for by their biological parents for part of their life, for all of their life. So we don't need to reimagine. What we need to do is convince society that we need to abolish adoption and return to re-embrace, more widely embrace this alternative. So what Ashley and I do is we trace a history of adoption, as opposed to, although somewhat parallel with, the history of the family regulation system. and show the ways in which adoption develops specifically out of racist, classist, misogynist ideas about the right form of family, the right form of parenting, and the right form of community, and show how adoption has consistently harmed people, harmed families throughout its history, and is harming people today. And then we look at the ways that people are trying to make adoption better, right? To make it not like the bad old days when we lied to children about their origins and, pretended that they weren't adopted. And we try to show how those reforms are never going to be enough. That ultimately within the family regulation system, without the family regulation system and private adoptions, that ultimately all of these reforms are just going to be co-opted and used to reinforce the system itself. That the foster care industry and the adoption industrial complex are incredibly talented at taking these reforms and making them a way to reinforce the system and keep destroying families.
So as you can all see, we have 4 fantastic papers struggling with this really exciting, daunting, and important task of abolishing, imagining, and creating in the moment. So what we're going to do now in this next segment is take everybody back through what got them to these really exciting projects. And so the question that I'm posing for everyone here who is on this panel, and we're going to take about 55 minutes with this, so this will be the longest segment of the panel. The question is, what brought you to write this paper for this conference? And how do these motivations connect to the themes that we've now heard that are in your papers? How do those motivations, those experiences connect to your choices about what you focus on in the family regulation system and what you focus on in the creation of something new? So we begin with Tahiba.
Okay, hello, how are you guys doing today? Am I off on mute? Okay. So I just want to say thank you for having me. I'm going to be speaking on behalf of Ending the Family Death Penalty. That's the paper in which I was, I co-wrote with my peers and my colleagues. This is a great question. And how are you doing today, Anne?
I'm doing great.
All right.
And you?
I'm well. I can't complain. I just wanted to say that first and foremost, caveat, I'm here with my grandson today. So if you hear any background noise and you hear Peppa Pig, that's what's going on. All right. And for me, what brought me to write this paper? Well, I was listening to all the papers that were being introduced, and it's an intertwining of it all. It's no one and done. It's everything is connected together. And Amy mentioned my why. When I was growing up, I grew up with my grandmother, right? My grandmother, there was no adoption for me. My grandmother took me in when I was when I was a little girl. So that was my why to write this paper and to say, I didn't realize as an adult what my childhood could have been comprised of until I actually met Erin, Lisa, and all the other ladies that's here on this panel with me, and understood that the complexities of the family regulation system. And I thought I was just blessed as a young girl to have a grandmother that was willing to bring me into her home and to raise me as, and not let me go into the system. And in a sense I was, but then I didn't realize how many people that were not as fortunate. And when I came to awareness of that like, I couldn't understand how we got here, right? And once I understood how we got here and understood the fact that the criminal and justice system, along with the family regulation system, is so closely connected and knitted together as they're like twin sisters, that I said, wow, because I saw the correlation being a woman that not only was raised by my grandmother, but when I was incarcerated, the child AKA protective system services tried to actually take my children because I was incarcerated. And when I didn't understand it, but I refused to let that happen, not knowing that I could. I just knew I needed to. And when I realized in the last few years at the first convening with joining forces with Aaron, Lisa, Joyce, Elizabeth, actually, it was so overwhelmingly clear for me that I had to be here. And this is something that is not, I do not have a disconnect to, right? We normalize the things that happen in life like it's okay because we don't know no better. So once I became aware and knew that I needed to do better, I started to do better. And that's how I came to write the paper with Aaron for the conference, because I believe my voice was important and I needed to be heard, and people wanted to actually hear it. So why not give it?
So Tahiba, we're
yes,
really, really glad that you're here. And, and your voice is part of it. I want to just get to the other voices from your paper to make sure that everybody gets out there. Because
am I up on my 6 minutes already? I apologize.
Go ahead. If you have some more things to say, go ahead.
No. Okay, so the how did it connect with the choices on the family regulation system? Well, it just connects because I didn't know I was up. I'm a public speaker, so I don't really realize time. I apologize, but yeah, it connects because we are all intertwined. All the papers that's here are intertwined together, and I believe that we should come together as a force with everything that we're working on individually, but build it in as a collective to reform, not even reform, but dismantle and abolish and rebuild what it is that we all looking to change, because it's all interconnected. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Elizabeth.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Brico. I'm a writer, a journalist, and a mother directly impacted by this system. And I'm also one of the co-authors on the same paper as Tahiba with Repeal ASPA, the Ending the Death Penalty paper. And I came to this topic and this work through my personal experience. When my children were stolen from me by the state of Florida, I was working as a journalist focused a lot on drug policy, drug addiction issues and things like that, which is also something that I lived through. I was addicted to heroin for several years, and that was really used against me. Like the history of my use was used against me, but also like my having been public about it and writing about it was used against me by the state of Florida. And that was something that was just really shocking and absurd to me. I didn't understand how I could be not actively using, not harming my children, not even accused of harming my children, but still lose them to the state. And I wanted to understand that to try to fight it. And that's how I ended up learning a lot more about the system, and eventually getting involved with Repeal ASPA and with this paper. And there are so many things about the system that are important to focus on and that are important to knock down in order to get rid of the system that just absolutely should not exist in any form. But the termination of parental rights and the Adoption and Safe Families Act that really feeds into that is something that deeply impacted me, and that I know deeply impacts so many other people in a way that just is not, it can't be repaired. When you have your kids taken, if they're returned to you, that trauma is going to live with you forever, but you have your family with you. There is an avenue for healing. When you have your rights terminated, there isn't. My rights were terminated last year, And it wasn't because, as I said, I was never even accused of having harmed my children. The investigator admitted that my children showed no signs of abuse or neglect. So my rights weren't terminated because I was like deemed this terrible danger. My rights were terminated because I didn't complete this ridiculous slew of tasks on the timeline set forth by the Adoption and Safe Families Act. And the reasons for that were not even based on my unwillingness to do it at all. It was based on factors that affect so many parents that it was just very difficult to access some of those services. Some of them were literally withheld from me by the people who were prescribing them. Some of them were related to drug addiction, which I did end up relapsing after months and months of being separated from my children, and then was denied evidence-based care, had to find it on my own, couldn't really find it because it wasn't really available in that county, and then was blamed for that. So, and these issues aren't issues that affect parenting directly, like by drug use doesn't inherently affect parenting. And even if it did, like, it's something that can be worked with. Like, I'm not using now that I no longer have people constantly asking me to take my clothes off in front of them and urinate in front of them and re-trigger my sexual trauma on a monthly basis. I'm no longer using. Why aren't my children home with me? Because my rights were terminated. So that's why I came to this, and why it's so deeply personal to me. It shouldn't have happened to me. It shouldn't have happened to my daughters, and it shouldn't continue to happen to other people. Nobody deserves this. And my daughters are not healthier or happier. They're never going to stop wanting to be with their parents, because that's normal and that's what children want. And they ask for that every day. I'm fortunate relatively in that they're with their paternal grandparents, so I still have contact with them. Some people who have their rights terminated lose all contact with their children, and that is horrific and is something that we really need to stop doing. I don't know if my time is up or not, but that's about
You have a few more minutes, so if you want to connect that to any more detail to the kinds of issues and work that you see as important, go ahead.
Sure. Well, I think just the main connection is just that we really need to stop stop conceiving of removal of children and termination of rights as some kind of form of safety. It is trauma, and we need to bring that to the forefront. Like, it is absolute at its core trauma for everyone involved, most especially the children, also the parents, and that needs to be consistently brought to the forefront. We are not helping children by traumatizing them. We are not helping parents overcome adversities by traumatizing them. We are not helping anyone by terminating parental rights. We are not helping anyone by adopting children by force to other people. We are not helping anyone by removing children from their homes. And that needs to be constantly reiterated. And I think that that's what we're doing here today. That's what this paper does. And then we need to reimagine a world where that isn't happening, where families are together, where families are helped, where communities are allowed to come together without the government watching and surveilling and intervening and deeming this thing okay or this thing not. I mean, we can make these decisions for ourselves.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And now another co-author of yours, Vanya.
Hi, thank you, Anne. And Elizabeth, that is, I don't know if warriors can cry, but that's the first thing that I do when I hear stories like that. And so I'm not going to take my 6 minutes up crying, but I did want to say that I feel you and I'm here with you. So my name is Vanya Quarles. I'm the It's a nonprofit that provides reentry services. And I'm also a member of the Movement for Family Power. And I too became introduced to Aaron and Lisa in Philadelphia. And at that time, I was experiencing the family regulation system because I was going to try and take care of my grandchildren. I'm a third generation convicted felon. And I'm 30 years away from any conviction. I'm a practicing attorney and the founder and director of a nonprofit. And I thought, hey, I could do this. You know, I could step in and take care of my grandchildren. And I found that the family regulation system doesn't care who I am or what I'm doing. They're looking at how to keep families separate. And for me, I had been in foster care. I had 3 children who were adopted out while I smoked crack and wore a size 1 and was incarcerated. And when I came home, my daughter had been adopted, and the adoption was all but final for 2 of my sons, my twins. And so adoption wasn't new to me. I had experienced it. And at the time of the adoption, the adoptive parent and the courts were telling me that this was the best thing that I could do for my children, that this was the only thing that I could do for my children. And at that time, I believed them. I believed that my life was going to be how it had been because I couldn't see the future, but neither could they. And so my point is, we cannot have a system, we cannot have ASFA because adoptions violate family safety. If we're going to have something like that, the A has to go. You cannot step on sacred bonds by laws or fictions created by laws. Adopting a child out is a fiction. It does not break a blood tie. My children that were adopted are 33 and 36 years old now. And I just contacted them, just made contact. We just found each other. So the judge banging his gavel, saying that you will never, ever in your life see these children, that wasn't true either. What I know to be true is that we have government harm in our communities, in Black, Brown, Indigenous communities to a much greater degree than any other community. And if we were having conversations about white babies, we wouldn't be here. But the reality is this harm has been going on since this system's inception, and it continues to create harm, disrespect, and devalue our families. And I am so grateful for this paper and to just be a part of it so that we can lift and raise this issue to tell you that we are warriors and we want you to understand what we're fighting for and why. And when we look at the outcomes associated with the family regulation system, with terminating parental rights, with adoptions, it clearly dictates that we have to abolish this system. We have to end this now. In our time, we have the power and the ability to do so. We have the education to do so. I'm lucky, I'm fortunate. After 240 days of going to court to try to bring my grandchildren into my care, I was able to do so. But I have the privilege of a law degree and being able to somewhat navigate a system. Most of my sisters don't have that. Most of the people that I was locked up with don't get that opportunity. And so I feel it's incumbent upon those of us who do have privilege to use our privilege to help those who need it. And I don't know how I'm doing on time.
You're just about there, so finish up and I'll move on to Erin. Go ahead.
I think I'm gonna give that to Erin. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So
Give it back to you, Vonya. I would. Hey, everybody. So why write this paper? So first, I'm really happy to be here virtually with everyone. I would rather be eating like Columbia free snacks right now, always. But I first wanted to say everything that was the introduction to the paper today was from the paper. They are not my words. They are not attributed to me. They're attributed to all the comrades on this paper. And so when you see a lot of names on this paper, That is because we are comrades, we are sisters, we are in this fight together. And so one of the reasons about writing this paper was to show that ending, to show that abolition is collective work. I know it may take up more space in a journal, but that's what real life is. It's all of us coming together to put forth an idea. And so sometimes I am on a Zoom by myself. Today I get to be on a Zoom with my sisters, with my comrades, but it is always a collective voice. And when we think about this particular space that we're in, the people that we're talking to today, there is a lot of privilege on this Zoom. There's a lot of privilege in a law review article. That privilege does not reflect the decades of activism that people like Ashley, like Tahiba, like Vonya, like Joyce, like Elizabeth, like decades of activism. That is a space of building that we should be listening to. And so that's why we write this paper. And third, I will say, like, maybe I'm fourth, third, I don't know. I am a little tired of the question, how do we do this? I'm gonna be honest, like, how do we abolish? Again, I really encourage people to look up the work of all the activists that have written this paper together. Like, they've been doing the work. You can Google Elizabeth's work. You can look at Women Against Mass Incarceration that Tahiba has started in Connecticut. You can look at Starting Over Inc. Vonya has been doing this for decades. Ashley has turned over, cases in Washington and represented so many people. Like, we need to be done with that question and more on the endeavor of figuring it out and listening to the activism for so long that has been submerged by academia, by spaces of intellectualism, by technocrats, right? And if that's not illustrative enough, we wrote about it. We've been collectively working together for 3 years. And so what we did is that this paper really memorializes that time. And when I say it memorializes that time, it literally is taken from agenda notes that we had together. It's taken from conversations that we had together. It's taken from phone calls that we had together. It's not a writing process where we sat there from beginning to end. It literally is a collective of cut and paste from agendas, right? Which also means there's not gonna be a prescriptive fix. I'm sorry, like liberations, I can't give you a bullet point. If I could give you a bullet point list for liberation, like, we would be there. I would not hide it from you, right? It is about doing the work. And so that's what we're doing. We're showing you that we sat together and visioned together, that we sat with artists and we thought about what this looked like to us. We're showing you that we spoke to people and we had conversations. We are writing about the many abolitionists in our ancestry and elders that we have learned from, like Critical Resistance, that have shaped our way of thinking about this work. We tell you that we got together in Philadelphia, 50 of us, to talk about this, right? Which means these are the answers. These are the ways to build. And if you want, every footnote is there for you to research it. It's laid out in a way for you to read it. It cites Black women, it cites activists. It is there for you. So do it, read it, look at it, learn from it. Like, that is the answer. And that's why we're writing it, right? We're writing it because this is activism for decades that deserves all the attention, love, and support that we could possibly give it. And we had about 15 pages, so we put it in there.
So thank you to the four of you who are all magnificent. And I too say, read this paper for the process that created it, as well as the tentative, strong, vibrant, creative wisdom that comes from it. As you'll see in all of these other papers too, that and thank you to Nancy and Jane for giving us, everybody here, the opportunity to take these actions that bring us together through the creation of written work that we share with other people. So now, moving on to Brianna. And the same question, what brought you to write your paper and how does it relate to what you are doing now and want to do in the future?
Yeah. I would first just like to say I'm just so grateful to be in this space and grateful to be in the space of warriors and activists and of people that are really invested and embedded in doing the work. So I definitely want to just kind of start with that and give honor where honor is due. But I think a lot of people, for me, this work is just deeply personal and deeply connected to my own past and lived experiences. So I grew up in a home that did foster care for over 13 years. And so I grew up having foster siblings and having relationships with birth parents. And even though I was young, I realized that this was a system that wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, that my siblings weren't getting their needs met, and that there were so many areas where their parents weren't being supported and where they weren't able to return home when they should have been. And like I said, I was young, but I understood something about this is not working and is not right. And so I think a lot of social workers, I was you know what, I want to fix this system. I'm going to become a social worker and I'm going to save the world. And it wasn't until I really began working within the family policing system that I realized my role was not doing any help. My role was really just upholding the same carceral logics that I was really wanting to dismantle. And so thankfully for me, I was able to step away from that. But I've worked as a social work practitioner for over 12 years. And so currently I work in the field of higher education. I run a foster youth support program, and the work that I do is really directly informed by those that have lived experience with the family policing system and supporting them as they really try to navigate college and higher education. But me, myself, I'm also a PhD student. So I'm kind of straddling the fence of being both a practitioner and someone that is still very much in the work, but also at the same time trying to emerge into this arena of scholarship. And so for me, my work really looks at the role of schools, specifically the K through 12 system, and the ways that they have collectively harmed Black families through their collusion with the family policing system, and really looking at the ways that schools have, over surveilled and just generationally harmed Black families. Also looking at other systems and structures in the afterlife of slavery that have just continued to also perpetuate harm against Black families and Black children specifically. So for me, I'm actually located in Los Angeles in LA County. And, this is the foster care capital of the world. We have more foster youth in our schools than any other school district in the nation, specifically Black foster youth. But yet our Black foster youth students are the ones that are suffering and significantly impacted. And so just within LA County, our Black foster youth are suspended and expelled at the highest rate. They're placed in special education at a higher rate than any other race, foster youth and non-foster youth. They have the lowest graduation rate, just pretty much any negative thing that you can imagine, our Black foster youth are experiencing it here within our schools. And we know that that's not an accident. We know that there is deep carceral logics that are connected and embedded and that are harming our youth. And so for me, I really want to use my work to not only interrogate all of these different systemic relationships, but really as a student of abolition, to work to find ways to disentangle and get rid of all of these systemic connections, because we know that the only way for us to be able to really get rid of and tear down the system is to also eliminate all of the ways that it's being upheld and it's being supported by other systems and structures. And so schools being one of them. So like I said, for me, I really hope that through my work, I can not only interrogate the harm that schools have caused, but also look at reimagining and look at schools as a space of support. I've conducted studies in the past with former foster youth that talked about schools being a space for them where they got their basic needs met, where they had relationships with adults and individuals. But what does that mean when the space that is one of safety and support for you is also the space that then reports you and has you removed from your biological family? And so I think that there is a tension there that hasn't fully been interrogated or discussed. And that's something that I really hope to do through my work.
Brianna, thank you. And Nancy has alerted me to let everybody who's listening to this panel know that the Columbia Journal of Race and the Law will be publishing these papers in 2 different volumes, and they'll be posted on the journal website. So they will be available to everybody, both online and then in print, should you want to give them to somebody you care about. but so that this work will get out there. So moving from Brianna to Josh, one of her co-authors, to get his sense of the way the two of you with yet another person came together with your motivations to create a phenomenal piece that goes into one of the critical segments of what brings people into this brutal system. Josh.
Thanks, Anna. And I first just want to say thank you to Brianna and to Christopher Church, who's not on screen, wonderful co-authors. It was a thrill and an honor to work with both of you. And the first thing that really got me motivated to work on this piece in particular was a year and however many months ago when the COVID pandemic began and everything shut down, and this terrible narrative was all over the press of, oh my God, schools are closed and all those mandatory reporters won't have eyes on kids. And of course, they really meant those kids, not my kids. And to say, well, if we don't have those professionals looking at those people's kids and reporting them to CPS agencies, that somehow the sky is going to fall. Now, however many months later, we have a flip side positive story. And on the next panel, I know Anna Ahrens is going to talk about some of her research. The sky didn't fall. We know that, and we know that the family policing system did lose many thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or more of hotline calls, and the sky didn't fall, right? And that's a really telling point and a powerful point for all of us going forward. One of the things that I think my co-authors and I really wanted to show, that we tried to show in our article, is that even by the system's own logic, that is taking their own decision points along the way, reports from schools, the leading source of child protective hotline allegations of abuse and neglect, even taking their own logic and their own terminology, their own decision points, these aren't very valuable reports, right? Other researchers had established that the substantiation rates are lower. I think one of the things that we were able to say is go through every point in their process and show that reports from schools are more likely to be screened out, and because they didn't even allege anything that the agencies thought amounted to abuse and neglect. They were more likely than other mandatory reporters to be sent to a differential response track in states that do differential response, less likely to even be investigated. Among those that are investigated, they're less likely to be substantiated. Among those substantiated, they're less likely to lead to removals. And I hope it's clear we're not for a minute saying that what they substantiate is truly abuse and neglect, or when they remove that those kids ought to be removed. But we are saying that even by their logic, these reports from schools are not that valuable, and yet this narrative was all over the place, right? And so we wanted to try to blow up that narrative somewhat. On the other hand, we also wanted to be envisioning what schools could be doing otherwise, right? In a more positive way, to provide real meaningful supports and voluntary and desired services to the families that we're all talking about. And that's a trickier and harder question for all the reasons that Brianna was saying, because schools have not been the great equalizer that they were envisioned to be a century and a half ago, right? They have been, and especially in lower income communities, especially in Black and brown communities, they have been key parts of a carceral web, which is a phrase that I thank Brianna for introducing me to, right? Whether in not just the mandatory reporting, but also the presence of law enforcement and others. So how can we figure out how to provide more meaningful assistance through schools, right? Which they're an obvious and logical place to try to build an alternative system, but without just replicating coercion and intervention by some other name. And that's where we want to go. The last thing I want to say is, and it's a little bit of a different point, it is, we've heard throughout this conference about ways that there's this false idea that child protective agencies, so-called, are a path to services and supports for families, right? And we've heard about ways, and I want to underscore everything that Miriam Mack was saying yesterday about the Family First Act, that even when we talk about ways to get those agencies providing more preventive services, that it comes with a really huge risk of underscoring this image of them as the pathway to services, right? And so the other thing that's exciting to me about envisioning what we can do in schools is we can envision a way to get meaningful services and desired services and real supports to families without going through CPS, with less regulation of families and more just direct supports.
So Josh and Brianna, thank you so much for taking us into the, not just the statistics, but the richness of your experience that brought you to this important issue of all the different institutions of our society that feed Black and brown and poor kids into this terrible, terrible system. So it's not just somebody who is in the the family regulation system. People are threatened by it in all facets of their lives. And as people like Tahiba and Vanya remind us, that the resources for coping with these systems and addressing them creatively exist every place too. So moving on from the motivations that took you to your paper, let's move on to Clara and thinking about how the hospitals are part of this whole terrible system.
Thank you. And I also just want to take the opportunity to say thank you to the panelists that I have the honor of presenting with. As a relative newcomer to the field and in comparison, and from a very particular and perhaps limited perspective as an attorney, it's a huge honor to be here with people who've been involved for decades and from their own lived experience in particular. So like I said, I'm a family defense attorney. I represent parents in family court. I have to say the initial impetus for writing this article was years of witnessing families in court who were separated after seeking medical care. These cases can be particularly intractable. A judge who feels her hands are tied by a medical provider's concern, even if it's just one sentence. Hospital bureaucracies that slow down discovery, balancing the schedules of clogged courts and busy doctors. Most of all, witnessing the sense of betrayal felt by our clients who thought that they were doing right by their child in seeking medical care, and instead walked into what they realized was a criminalized space. So much about these cases is wrong. Confidentiality of medical information is slashed, due process for parents is corrupted, not to mention the irreparable trauma of the separation. It was through witnessing this that I started devoting time to speaking with medical providers about the family regulation system, building on relationships that were first established by the director of our practice, Emma Ketteringham. I, along with colleagues, have been speaking to residents, doctors, medical students, hospital social workers for the last few years. In these presentations, we describe in detail what an ACS investigation looks like. We show them how their own words wind up in a family court petition. We describe how quickly children are removed as a result of these trace quotes and how long litigation takes to get them home. And as a general matter, and I'm excluding from this positions like child abuse pediatricians, but as a general matter, our presentations are met with dismay. Many doctors have no idea the power that they hold. They're barely trained in what the family regulation system is, and they've always been told it's safer to call than not, and they always ask what the alternative is. It's been bewildering and infuriating to see that these individuals who have so much power have so little information on how to use it in a way that does not cause lasting harm. To me, this is a fundamental flaw in the system that has to be addressed at the root, in critically examining the historical reliance of the family regulation system on medical providers to provide families for the system to investigate. It is also clear that although providers truly may be sobered by the harm of the system, they're trained and obligated to associate certain things with risk of harm. Delayed medical care, defensive demeanor, and injury a parent can't explain. This is how they're trained, and hospital policies reflect it. It's hard work to overcome their years of training and education. I had another motivation in writing this article. As I said earlier, there's a conception that cases coming from hospitals represent either more serious cases or allegations that are more reliable. These are the cases of broken bones, burns, head trauma, babies born with positive toxicologies, children missing doctor's appointments. These are the cases that work to justify the existence of the family regulation system. Advocates of shrinking rather than abolishing the system might say that it should be reserved for these more serious cases, and those tend to be the cases coming from hospitals. I guess in comparison to the schools, the hospitals are the most likely to be screened and found indicated. So setting up a dichotomy of so-called justified cases against the unjustified does nothing to fundamentally question the system, it just legitimizes it. It splits the movement and it undermines the efforts to truly seek a new kind of support for families. This is also a false dichotomy. The notion that reports coming from hospitals are more reliable or serious just isn't accurate. Those of us representing parents on a daily basis and parents who've been there see that cases coming from hospitals are just as responsible for racist and classist assumptions about parenting as any other case. Hospitals are where a white mother and a Black mother can each bring their baby in, terrified that she's rolled off the bed or a changing table. One will receive sympathy and reassurances and comments like, it happens to everyone, because it does, and the other will be prosecuted. Hospitals are where some parents whose children come in with burns will be questioned or perhaps visited a few times. Others are arrested and charged with felonies. Hospitals are where if a white mother misses an appointment or an immunization and confides in a pediatrician that she's overwhelmed with her caretaking responsibilities, she'll get encouraging words. Another will be referred to ACS, and overwhelmed is the buzzword in the neglect petition that says she's put her child's life or safety at risk. It's where some pregnant women who are drug tested based on her answers to a questionnaire, but where other women may never have been asked those questions in the first place because of their privilege, reassured the medical provider they weren't necessary. So why is this? The field of medicine teaches that abuse and neglect can be sussed out by looking at things like risk factors, which tend to perpetuate racist and classist assumptions about parenting. But what is so harmful is that these reports that may be based not on any medical evidence, but rather on a parent's demeanor or level of defensiveness, unstable housing, an incarcerated father or other children in the system, get the authority and deference of a medical diagnosis that scares the legal system. So I return to answer the question. I wrote this article, perhaps aspirationally, to try to reach both the medical and the legal communities on behalf of families caught in the middle, to show the legal system that mandated reporting for doctors is fundamentally flawed, and then hopefully to convince doctors that calling ACS on a family is akin to prescribing a most dangerous intervention. It comes with grave risks of harm, medical, personal, social. I'm interested in this because in order to divert resources away from the prosecutorial system that we have and towards confidential community-based solutions, we will need doctors to understand why a call to ACS is so harmful and one they should never want for their patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. And thank you for giving us insight into the feelings and emotions that operate when yet another institution brings families into this brutal system and brings them in so differentially in ways that have been documented over and over and over. But it's only through the collective action that documentation takes on meaning in people's understanding of the world. So now moving on to adoption, to the end, and what brought both Amy and Ashley to write about that subject. Amy first.
So I think, first of all, to be clear, I mean, since Ashley and I developed this paper together, Joyce McMillan, the amazing Joyce McMillan, connector of all people, knower of all things, connected us to write something together. And so certainly the answer there is just that I talked to Ashley, I heard her story, I heard what she had survived and also what she had accomplished. And I just wanted to burn it all down. But obviously Ashley's story isn't unique. And it's not the first story of that sort that I've heard. As a family defense attorney, I've seen many families destroyed in the name of, permanency. And I've seen the way that adoption and the idea of adoption as this like shiny, pretty end goal drives choices in the system. And so this is something I've been thinking about for a long time, thinking about the way that until we take on that sort of sacred idea of adoption, that happy day when family court judges get to make families, we're never going to really get rid of this system. I think, another thing that is the reason that I've come to this, and the reason this has really been what I think about all the time, is that, I started doing family defense work in January of 2009. And 2 weeks after I did my very first intake shift in Brooklyn Family Court, my now adopted son was placed in my home for private adoption. And while at the time I was definitely aware of some strangeness or wrongness about that, the confluence of those two things, the fact that I was fighting to keep families together in court every day and then going home and raising another mother's child as my child. I think I eventually, so while I was, I saw that, I think I saw the two things as different. And I think many people do see the two things as different. Private adoptions, so-called voluntary adoptions and public adoptions. And there are differences. And, I don't think that the paper's over those. I'm not trying to ignore them, but they're also fundamentally the same in many ways. And I came to realize after many years of doing this work, after many years of reading and listening, to see the important way in which my role in the system as an adoptive parent in a private adoption mirrors the role of, those who benefit from adoption in the family policing system. And, certainly the social forces that constrained the choices of the parents of my children and others like them across the country, and others like them in decades past, racial discrimination, the lack of a social safety net, restrictions on immigration, xenophobia, misogyny, the fact that there are no good solutions for gender-based violence, and economic policies that are designed to keep a large segment of the American public at the bottom of the ladder for the benefit of the people at the top of the ladder. These are the same things that led to the creation and the growth of the family regulation system. These are the same things that lead to the destruction of families through that system. And to get to really attacking the endpoint of the family regulation system, we have to take on the concept of adoption as being an acceptable thing, as being something that we can do. Because as someone, and I don't remember who, I think it was Fania, called out, it's a legal fiction, it's fake, it's not real. You can't destroy a biological family bond. You can't destroy a parent-child relationship. It's still there, but at the same time that it's a completely fake thing, it wreaks enormous harm. And within the system, in terms of leading judges to terminate rights because there's a pre-adoptive foster parent who loves this kid and they say this kid is bonded to, even though that the biological parent has another child at home that they're parenting and is clearly fit. It also, leads adoption agencies who are making billions of dollars to put up billboards and, put out commercials trying to convince pregnant women that it's the most loving thing to give up their child to someone else. And I felt like this idea of taking adoption on as a whole is an opportunity to bring together the survivors of all the parts of the system, right? The parents who have gotten caught up in all the parts of the system and the children who have had their family bonds severed in all the parts of the system to advocate together. Because, I gotta say, adult adoptees from private adoptions are a powerful vocal force and they will fight for foster adoptees. They will join together with foster adoptees. And so I thought that not that no one has ever done this before, but lots of people have done this before, but I thought that it needs to be taken on again and talked about loudly and forcefully. And we need to say the things that I think a lot of people are hesitant to say because adoption is seen as beautiful by most of this country. And I wanted to take that on. To be fair, I also just like saying the things that other people get angry about other people saying. So So that's
Amy, thank you for taking us into this incredibly difficult, emotionally wrenching and complicated area of adoption, and particularly on top of the other words that we've heard from other panelists about how exactly the place you begin, that adoption happens other ways. We don't need adoption, that families take care of each other. So let's add to what you've already said with Ashley's, your co-author's thoughts and the person who has educated you about so much in your exploration of this. Ashley.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ashley Albert. I'm a parent out of Washington State. I'm so grateful to be here today. I am the co-author of 2 papers, Ending the Family Death Penalty and Adoption Cannot Be Reformed. And I just want to give honor to my higher power, whom I choose to call God, who has given me so much grace through this pain and turmoil that I've been trudging through. Without him, I would not be here today. Because of these topics that we're discussing and the information that has been shared, and thank you to my panelists that I'm on the panel with, I tried to take my life for this same issue. And so I just want to give honor and thanks to God for carrying me through when I didn't even know what the heck I was facing and walking through. I did not know that I would be in a platform with abolitionists, some strong people advocating for change. I started off, in this work in reform, and so grateful for that, because a lady by the name of Sharonda Silivanoff gave me great mentorship and took me under her wing here in Washington and showed me ways of learning how to advocate for myself and how to advocate for families of color. And thank you to Joyce McMillan, who introduced me to Amy Musler, who also was present with Lisa Sangoy and Tahiba Bain here in Washington in 2019 when I met them in Starbucks in Renton, Washington. I don't know how I ended up meeting these people. I was in a platform of reform, speaking abolitionist language. I had no idea that I was an abolitionist, and I am proud to say that I am that today. I went through the family regulation system in 1997, went through foster care, came in at 9, aged out at 18, had my first child at 15, went through domestic violence, went through juvenile, went through mental health, all the stuff. And I suffered. And it didn't appear to me that I had all this built up hate and anger towards my mother, who faced addiction and was not able to raise me in her custody. And I felt like she left me and didn't care about me with my grandmother, who had health conditions. I did not know about the Adoption Safe Family Act. I did not know about the welfare bill. I didn't know about the crime bill. I didn't know about all these punitive laws that prevented my mother from being able to come back and be a part of my life, even if she wanted to. And when I was put in the same box and ridiculed and not did any of the things that she'd done, I seen a different side of things. And I began to understand that a lot of that built up anger was false. I had to do a lot of work on repairing the relationship between me and my mother, and I watched my grandmother and my mother fight and struggle around keeping my mom out of the family or letting her in. My grandmother, with deep roots from Waynesboro, Georgia, could not wrap around her mind to keep her only daughter away from her children. And I had to watch my grandma be threatened and struggle with, if she let her daughter come around her grandchildren, that we would be taken from her. We still deal with the effects of that. I lost my children. Actually, my children were stolen from me. And in speaking in Reform platform, I was critiqued to share my story in a certain way. So, and I want to apologize in advance that if I take over 6 minutes, it's because this is the first time that I tell my truth. It was wrong for what happened to me. I did not want my children adopted. I was punished and criticized for having childhood trauma that I didn't even know how to even to bring to the surface, address, or even identify. I had no idea how to even articulate what was happening to me internally. And I was punished for that. And so when I have this opportunity to be able to be co-authors on 2 different papers, I give honor and praise to God, because what he's telling me is this is your time to tell the truth. I have no plan or no energy to sit in places that do not allow me to operate in my higher good and in my truth. The truth is that my children were stolen from me, and I was threatened that if I did not sign those adoption papers, I would never see my kids again. I was always operated from a place of abuse, control, and power. And the very same things that these folks, these lawyers and judges and social workers were talking about, they were protecting me from when I was a child, they ended up doing the same exact thing to me. The same exact thing. Punitive. I have no large amounts of money. I have no law degree. I have no rich grandparents that can come save me and wave money to come and change my circumstances. And I've felt alone through a lot of this process, especially working in the work with other parents in reform who've gotten their children back. Because the pain and the advocacy that I'm sharing it didn't correlate to one another. And to those parents in reform, I love them to death. And I support the work that you do, but I cannot advocate for reform because I have not reaped the benefits of that. I cannot. And even till this day, I'm still fighting after being the first African-American parent in the state of Washington to legally enforce and modify an open adoption agreement. All of that's wonderful and celebratory, but the truth is it shouldn't happen. I'm 34 years old and I've spent my entire 20s and up until now fighting just to have contact with my children. And I'm angry. I am tired. I am scared. I am carrying generation pain with me while doing this just to see my kids. My grandmother who raised me, her fear of dying before she gets to see her great grandchildren again. That type of emotion I'm carrying. So when I put my name to anything today in regards to families and children and people of color, it's only to tell the truth about what happened. And we need restorative justice. We need to be able to say, this is what you did, this is how it affected me, and this is how I feel. What are we going to do? When are we going to have an honest conversation about how you are going to make the damages repairable? Because even after getting these kids back, they're angry like I was to my mom, disrespectful, full of rage, forget anger. They feel entitled to these parents, and they feel like we owe them something because we weren't there to take care and protect them, not knowing that these are laws put in place that allow that to happen. And the truth needs to be told. And I'm not saying that to say that I'm holier than thou. What I'm saying is that I've reaped the repercussions of the pain and trauma of blaming my mother, of living with feeling like she didn't want me, of finding out the truth, doing the work, the healing, the emotional work, going back till this day, rebuilding a new relationship with my mother, only to turn around so that I can do the same thing with my son, another generational curse. It has to stop. So that's what brought me here to write these papers, not because I knew that I needed to be here, but women seen in me what I didn't see in myself. I had no idea that I was going to be in advocacy. I woke up and wanted to be the president of the United States. That was my dream as a little girl. I didn't want to deal with losing my children, going through foster care. I didn't want to be that person. And the truth is that I've been affected by that. And I have not reaped any good benefits. And I want to. And I have an idea. I have a few ideas how to bring healing to those families that walk behind me, because I'm doing the work while advocating to end these punitive laws. So I appreciate all of you who've been doing this work before me, Dorothy Roberts, all of you amazing activists and advocates who were advocating for me before I even knew that you knew my truth. I'm so grateful that I did not commit suicide when after signing those adoption papers. I'm so glad that I found people who I didn't have to explain the pain that I was in, because they already knew, because it happened to them too. I'm just so grateful that I ended up turning my pain into power for change. And this is for all the colored girls, all the colored girls. I just don't want them to have to say me too. So thank you so much for letting me be here. Without God's grace, I wouldn't be here today. And I just have to say that. I have to say that these things we're talking about, I really tried to kill myself. I wanted to escape this reality. But now I don't wait for the storm to disappear. God has given me grace to dance in the rain. And so I own my story and not let my story own me. So thank you so much for letting me be a part of this amazing movement. I can't wait to see the benefits that reap from this. Thank you for all the work that you all do too.
And Ashley, thank you. Thank you for bringing your story to our collective knowledge, your individual story, and a story which resonates with every other story that we heard in this panel and we've heard through this conference. And as part of your brilliance here, you have in fact taken us on to the next question that we had decided to move on to, which is somewhat the question that Erin says she is tired of. Well, what does all of this take us in terms of what do we do when we have imagined a different future, when we've looked back and seen and felt all of our pain, and we have developed such amazing strength and courage and brilliance in feeling that and telling it and sharing it with others. So rather than framing it in the way that we've come to frame it in this conference, what is a non-reformist reform? What is on the path to this vision that we have? For each of the papers, we all identified somebody to talk some about this issue, which you raised in Ashley in the end of your talking, which is that wanting to go on and do things and help people who are behind you, who are coming after you the way other people have been there with you and for you through things. So let me go to Elizabeth here. What are some of your thoughts about how we move forward?
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. Anytime I have the privilege of hearing Ashley speak, I want to cry, so I apologize. But it's a great question. It's a difficult question. It's a frustrating question. But it is important to think about moving forward. And I think I can't provide as one person with the limited time, or even if I had unlimited time as one person, I couldn't provide the definitive answer to this question. But I think that something that's really important to help answer this question, especially when it comes to the family death penalty, the termination of parental rights that we address in our paper, is to make sure that we are centering the safety of children for the real safety of children, not the way that it's used and weaponized in the system, but the safety of children's need to be with their families. And the fact that separation is trauma and that separation is harm, that needs to be something that is at the forefront and remembered constantly. Are we helping children remain with their families? When we are trying to help families, are we including the sanctity of that family as a whole in what we're doing? Which right now, most of the time with the system, that's not at the forefront. And that's a huge problem. So, I mean, I really believe if we as a society recognize, like truly, genuinely recognize that separating children from their homes is severe trauma, we wouldn't have the family death penalty. And that is a really important step, just recognizing that, like truly recognizing that and like sitting with it and really understanding what it means is a really important step to abolishing it. Because when you know that, you can't just go and remove a child. You know, you would actually genuinely do other things to try to help whatever the situation is, if it even requires any kind of help. You wouldn't, you know, so that's something. And then there are other steps. I'm not like, okay. I do want to just like burn the system down today. Like I would be so happy. I would love to just like abolish it right now. That's the truth. But I also recognize that like my ideal is probably not going to happen. So I recognize that we do probably have to make reforms before we can get to abolition, but centering abolition as the goal of those reforms is really important, in my opinion. We have to recognize that this is a system that is not rooted in child safety. It's rooted in harm. It's rooted in racism that goes way back. It's rooted in classism that goes way back. It's rooted in ableism, sexism, all of these just different forms of oppression that have been carried forth, and somehow some marketing was done to make it look like they're being worked for child safety. But that's really what the system is. It's just carrying forward all of these oppressive issues and using it to harm families. So we need to make sure that whatever we're doing to try to like reform the system is recognizing that fact and recognizing the fact of child safety. And I think that, you know, I'm part of the Repeal ASFA group because I do think that repealing ASFA is a reform that does center that does recognize that this particular law is really harmful and a perpetuation of all of these different oppressions that we need to get rid of.
So Elizabeth gives us some important guideposts here about how to move forward, things to continue to pay attention to and work on as we, even when all those moments when we want to just burn it down, shove it to the ground, whatever metaphor we want. Josh, thoughts from you?
So none of my thoughts will burn the system down. So I'll start by that. And I'll also start by acknowledging that I know my co-authors and I don't pretend that this is a comprehensive list or anything close, but hopefully it's a start focusing on the institution of schools. So most obvious place to start is we need to end the mandatory reporting for all the reasons probably 99% of people listening already know, so I won't spend more time on it, except to say that's a necessary but not sufficient start. Because we know from a lot of research, including research that Kelly Fong, who's moderated one of the panels yesterday, has done, that folks call the hotline not only because the law requires them to, or they feel the law requires them to, but because they think they'll actually get people help. They'll get families help by calling CPS agencies in. And so we need to build another path. So one of the stories that Christopher told when he was a staff attorney in a medical legal partnership is folks told him, well, when we refer families to you, we don't have to call CPS anymore because we know you're going to take care of whatever you're required. He was a lawyer for the families. He wasn't going to do anything remotely like what a CPS agency would do. So here's one idea: schools as a source for legal services. And there's some small models that we cite in our paper. There is so much work being done on parent representation and family defense work, especially pre-petition work. It's one of the best things happening in our field. And if you talk to any of the folks who are leaders in that movement, they'll tell you most of what they do has nothing to do with the law of child neglect and child abuse. They're doing housing law and poverty law and public benefits law and immigration law and all sorts of other things. There's no reason you have to be deemed to be pre-child abuse and neglect petition. We need alternative mechanisms to fill the massive unmet need of civil legal services, right? And schools can be a mechanism to do that, and then it can convince people not to use the CPS hotline call. We can connect families to public benefits and other support. School districts as institutions know what their families are eligible for. And so they're in a perfect position to actually help make sure that families are getting what they're eligible for if they want it. The school-based medical and mental health care, as Brianna mentioned a while ago. I'll add to that, especially with this service, it's important to note, it's important to make sure that these services are provided in a way that they're structured in a way that those service providers aren't spies for the agency, right? They'll provide services if families want them, but will not. They're not connected to the agency. It's a totally separate pathway to the services that some teachers and school social workers may identify that families need, but without asking those service providers then to report on the families they're supposed to be serving confidentially. Connected to that, there is a role for more school social workers, but it's got to be done really carefully with a lot of attention given to the job descriptions and to the supervision of those workers to make sure that they're not just funneling more people over to CPS agencies. Last thing I will say is, as we try to build and imagine what a system through schools can be, we need to be paying attention to how we can take down a carceral web that exists in schools already. So I mentioned in our paper, I use my home school district. I'm at the University of South Carolina in Columbia, South Carolina. The Richland 1 school district that my family lives in spends more, not a particularly large school district, like 23,000 kids, spends more than $2 million a year policing our children, including more than $1 million a year providing a police officer in every elementary school in our school district, right? Wouldn't it be nice if we could redirect some of those resources as a way to pay for some of the expanded services we're talking about, so we can both dismantle the carceral web and build up a much better service provision system?
So thank you, Josh. And now moving on to Clara to continue to enrich this free form way of imagining things that we can do that will lead to abolition.
Thank you. Well, perhaps unsurprisingly, my remarks will echo Josh's, but from a hospital perspective. But I first want to say that I think it's important to identify that the family regulation system, the history of the connection between the family regulation system and the hospitals is deep. The system has always relied on doctors to provide a pool of families to investigate. Many states initially only labeled physicians as the first mandated reporters. So this means that from the 1960s, the system sought to intrude on the safety of the doctor-parent relationship. Mandated reporting transformed what was supposed to be, in theory, a confidential and therapeutic space into one that was explicitly conditional and criminalized. Where a doctor's sole obligation was previously to the patient, mandated reporting demoted that and prioritized a duty to the state. So in my paper, I outline certain examples, stories of families that I've encountered that And I think the risk of offering those is that the interpretation of them could be characterized as simply bad or miscommunication between the medical system and the legal system, a problem of process rather than substance. And if that's a characterization, the answer would seem to be to improve communication or improve information sharing, smooth the process, and bring these institutions closer. But this interpretation is very dangerous, and it's likely what led to the establishment of things like the child advocacy centers, which in New York, at least, are explicit collaborations between hospitals, ACS, and the NYPD, which is where doctors become investigators. And there's no confidentiality. And why so many parents who are familiar with them are tempted to avoid medical care in the first place. So these types of reforms just strengthen the carceral aspects of the hospital setting. The problem is in the historical links. So the first non-reformist reform, I think, is to remove those legal ties and obligations between the systems, delink them. There are many components that would follow, and I think which would be very interesting conversations about gradually reconceptualizing for the used to be reporters that a call to CPS is a very dangerous intervention that in other aspects of medicine would be avoided at all costs. And to, as Elizabeth said, center the safety of the child as the real driving factor, which will, I think, worked over time to devote more resources to the communities and away from the prosecutorial system we have now. Again, it doesn't burn it down overnight, but I think that removing that link between the formal and very long historical link between hospitals and the legal system is a critical first step.
Thank you, Clara, for again taking us into a deeper and richer and more complex part of this process. And now we'll end with Amy and some of the ways forward that you see, having done your work with Ashley on this paper.
So, just here, I think Ashley and I have gone back and forth through the course of setting up this panel on who gets to answer this question, because neither of us wanted to. We're throwing it back and forth. So I'm stuck with it, hot potato, because both of us had the sense that, like, no, we just wanted to burn it all down. And that's not just because we wanted to burn it all down, although that's true, but also because a huge part of the paper that we wrote is about how all of these various reforms that have been pursued in adoption have just become ways to reinforce the system and have been sort of co-opted, if not even co-opted, but like almost driven by the agencies themselves in some way. The way, and the main thing we focus on is open adoption and how that's seen as this radical change, but in fact, it's not at all a change. And it's used, it's used to pressure parents into not going to trial on TBR petitions. And it's very limited. It puts families under the scrutiny of adoptive parents. Visits are like supervised by the child's new family and under the control of the child's new family. And that, adoptive parent groups, adoption agencies have come forward and said, we love open adoption. We love keeping communication between birth families and adoptive families and adoptees, but they only want that if the adoptive parents are in control, if the adoptive parents can cut it off, if the adoptive parents can be the ones who decide what that looks like. And so we had a hard time coming up with things that we didn't think would just be co-opted. What I can say is that I think that we need to take steps, and I think this is happening. I do think people are already doing this work. We need to take steps to push adoption down the list of options. So anything we can do, so repeal ASFA, duh. I think we can all agree on that. But beyond that, even push guardianship up, right? Like right now, yeah, we have guardianship as an option, and we even finally have funding for kinship guardianship. And they even get bonuses for guardianships now, not just adoptions. That's great, although it's lesser in some cases. But why don't we make it so adoption is the second option? So you can only do an adoption if guardianship isn't available for some reason. Instead of it being you only do a guardianship if adoption isn't available. Let's do that. Let's make agencies establish why adoption should be pursued instead of something else, instead of having them establish why something else should be pursued instead of adoption. So I think that those sort of things are good. I think we have a lot of culture shifting work to do. I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of calling out the real harm of adoption, no matter how uncomfortable that makes foster care agencies, adoption lawyers, adoptive parents. Call it out. It's harm. It's not the happy ending that fixes the harm that was already done. It's harm. And finally, I think if we're assessing reforms, if you look at a given reform, I think the more that reform gives power to parents, birth parents, because since I'm talking about both, I have to specify, but I normally don't like to specify. The more that the power is in the hands of the birth parents and the adoptees, and the less it's in the hands of agencies and adoptive parents, the better, right? So anything that places more power in the hands of parents and less power in the hands of the state and the state's agents, the adoptive parents.
So thank you all. Thank you for an amazing panel. And let me just say, we'll stay here for the breakout room for all of you who have had the privilege of listening to these amazing people. We'll stay here in the breakout room, and there are some questions about when the papers will be available. Most of them will be available on the site for the Columbia Journal of Gender and of Race and the Law next month, and some will be available in the fall. I don't know which ones. There will be more information at the end of the conference, and I imagine it will be posted, and so you can get it. If anybody wants something earlier, contact one of us who's been in a position of organizing this, and we'll figure out how to get you some version of something that has been written, and to share this amazing knowledge, this collective knowledge that goes backwards in time and projects itself forwards in time, to change something which has been treated as untreatable, just even for people who thought it was terrible, but untreatable in a corner. And thank you all for making it accessible to all of us as something we can work to reimagine and transform. So I'll stay. Most of the panelists will be able to stay, but the rest of you who are here watching want your break and want some freedom from Zoom, please go take it. And then will be the final panel of the day of this amazing conference. So goodbye, everybody.
I want to set it off, guys. You guys were amazing. I am so happy to say that I know you, that I have the opportunity to work with you. Ashley, I could never be more proud. I could never be more proud. You brought your truth, and I loved it. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for your thoughtful words, and your presence and your energy. I don't want to be biased, but this is the best panel I've seen other than the keynote.
Thank you, Joyce. We love you, and we are so indebted to your advocacy and legacy and activism in this work.
For sure.
There's a question here about getting a transcript. I don't know the answer